Upasaka, Upasika, Dhamma brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen, good morning everybody. Homage to the Buddha, Namo Buddhaya. Today is my honor to be here, to be with you in various kinds of activities, especially doing the very good actions. From the morning, I see that some of you begin the day with offering alms to the monks, and it is also a very special day. That is the Uposatha day. And also now we are getting together to be here to practice some other activities, paying homage to the Buddha, reciting Parita discourses, and now we are together again contemplating the Dhamma, the teachings of the Buddha, by listening the Dhamma sharing. And I would like to thank especially to the committee members of Nalanda Centre, because I get the opportunity, not only today but even yesterday. We are coming from Indonesia, not only me actually, but there are some other 10 monks all together going to Wisdom Park, and we have the Dhamma discussion there. And such a very beautiful park, very nice place with the suitable weather there, and really the quality time that we get together in that Wisdom Park. And today also, as already mentioned, that we will have to discuss about one most important teachings of the Buddha, that is dependent co-origination or Paticcasamuppada. And actually this morning, Sister Nandini tell me that how is it possible to explain this Paticcasamuppada in simple way. But of course, this Paticcasamuppada is not a simple thing, but this is very profound teaching. And that also mentioned by the Buddha himself. Once when one of his disciples, the most Venerable Ananda, said that while other people sees this Paticcasamuppada as a very profound teaching, very profound understanding, but to him, Bhante Ananda said that to him, this Paticcasamuppada is very clear. But then the Buddha refraining him not to say so, because this dependent co-origination, this Paticcasamuppada is very profound, not only in the sense of meaning, but even its appearance is also very profound. And because of non-understanding, non-penetrating this dependent co-origination, this Paticcasamuppada, that creatures, that beings, getting trapped in these rounds of birth and death. And this shows that in order to get rid of this suffering, these defilements of mind, this round of birth and death, we have to understand this Paticcasamuppada. Not only just understanding, but even we have to penetrate this Paticcasamuppada, and there is no other way. And in other discourse, the Buddha also mentioned, emphasizing how important this Paticcasamuppada, as I already mentioned, that the one who knows or sees the Paticcasamuppada, he sees the Dhamma. And one who knows the Dhamma, also knowing this Paticcasamuppada. That means that Paticcasamuppada and the Dhamma is not the two different things. This is the one thing. We know the Dhamma and we know this Paticcasamuppada. When we know Paticcasamuppada, we also know the Dhamma. And another discourse also mentioned that the one who knows the Buddha is not the person as the person, but also as the awakened mind. That the person knows the Buddha, when the person knows about the awakened mind, that person knows the Paticcasamuppada. And when the person knows Paticcasamuppada, such a person also knows this awakened mind, the Buddha. So this is how Paticcasamuppada is very important for us as the Buddhist practitioners to understand, because this is not only just about philosophical understanding. So the Paticcasamuppada is being taught, is being learned by us not for the sake of philosophical understanding, but more than that, it is for the practical necessity. So that means we have to understand this in order to bring in our life in the practice, not in the just understanding, just theoretical understanding, but for the sake of practice. So how we understand this Paticcasamuppada? We understand that there are two kinds of Paticcasamuppada. The first kind of Paticcasamuppada is the Paticcasamuppada in order. And the second one is Paticcasamuppada in reverse order. So Paticcasamuppada in order is also to be considered as the wrong path, or Micca Patipada. Why is that? Because when we follow these factors of Paticcasamuppada in order, that leads to the suffering, that leads to the rebirth. So this is how it is called as the wrong path. But when we understand this Paticcasamuppada in reverse order, that is also, as the Buddha said, considered to be the right path, or Samma Padipada. So why? Because when we understand this, we understand and we penetrate this, and that leads to the cessation of suffering. So the two things must be understood. But in order to understand the second one, the first one should be understood first. So not only just the second, but the first one, this is the first thing that we have to understand. What is the Paticcasamuppada in order? And especially when we are talking about the Paticcasamuppada or dependent origination, we also have to understand that this teaching is closely related to the main teachings of the Buddha. As we know that the main teachings of the Buddha is the Four Noble Truths. So the Buddha, for 45 years, teaching his teaching is actually for the sake of understanding the Four Noble Truths about the truth of suffering, the truth of the cause of suffering, the cessation of suffering, and the way leading to the cessation of suffering. So all the teachings of the Buddha are taught by him, by the Buddha, for the sake of understanding the Four Noble Truths. So likewise, this Paticcasamuppada is also being taught by the Buddha in order to understand what is the Four Noble Truths, especially how this suffering arises and how this suffering ceases. So there is no separation between the Four Noble Truths and this Paticcasamuppada. So especially this Paticcasamuppada is being taught to understand how this suffering that we experience in our life rises, and how this suffering can be eliminated, and ultimately there will be the cessation of suffering. So the two things should be understood in this regard, in these teachings of Paticcasamuppada. So therefore, the first order of Paticcasamuppada is called as the Micca Patipada. But we need to understand why it is called as Micca Patipada. And what is called by the Paticcasamuppada in order, or Micca Patipada, is begin with avijja. Avijja Paccaya Sankara. So you see, avijja Paccaya Sankara. With the avijja, avijja means the non-understanding, the ignorance. With the ignorance or non-understanding as the conditions, there arises sankara. Sankara can be translated as the mental activities or as the formation. So there are three kinds of sankara actually. This is the verbal sankara, and then bodily sankara, and the mental sankara. This is the activities of the speech, of the body, and of the mind. And that is also related to the karma or action. So with this avijja, the non-understanding or ignorance as the condition, there arises various kinds of action, various kinds of karma, various kinds of sankhara. Now we can explain later. And then now, because of this sankhara, there arises vijnana, consciousness. And sometimes the Buddha said about the 6 kinds of consciousness. If you read like Nidana Samyutta, there is 6 kinds of consciousness: the eye consciousness, the ear consciousness, the nose, the tongue, the body, and the mental or mind consciousness. The 6 kinds of consciousness. But in another discourse, it is mentioned about the rebirth consciousness, or it is called Paticcasamuppada vijnana. But somehow this is the consciousness. Because of this sankhara, because of this karma, because of this action, there will be the consciousness. And because of the consciousness, there arises name and form, nama and rupa, name and form. So actually, the consciousness with regard to the 5 aggregates, if you already know about the 5 aggregates, there are the aggregates of the form, the aggregates of the feeling, and the perception, mental formation, and the consciousness. And this consciousness is the aggregate of the consciousness. Vijnana is the aggregate of the consciousness. While the name and form is the aggregates of the first 4 aggregates. So the form is the aggregates of the form, that is the body, or we call as the rupa khanda. And then the name is the aggregates of the feeling, perception, and the mental formation. So this is how the vijnana and other 4 aggregates are interrelated. And now later we will explain. And because of this nama rupa, there arises salayatana, the 6 sense bases. What are the 6 sense bases? This is the eyes and the ears, the nose, the tongue, the body, and also the mind. And these 6 sense bases have their own objects. So the eyes with the form as its object, the ears has the sound as its object, the nose has the smell, the tongue as the taste, the body as the touch, and the mind as the mental objects. So each and every sense basis has its own objects of it. So this is the salayatana. And because of salayatana, the 6 sense object, there arises phasa, contact. So there are 6 kinds of contact depending on the sense object. So the contact arises due to the eyes, the ears, the nose, the tongue, the body, and the mind. And because of the phasa, or the phasa as the condition, there arises vedana, or the feeling. So there are 3 kinds of feeling. Usually we mention about 3 kinds of feeling: the pleasant feeling, unpleasant feeling, and neutral feeling. So these 3 feelings also related to the 6 sense bases. So the 3 times 6, there will be 18 kinds of feeling. So sometimes the 18 kinds of feeling can be divided into, not divided, but times 3. The past feeling, the present feeling, and the future feeling. There will be how many? 18 times 3, 54, right? 54. And now sometime the 54 kinds of feeling also times 2. One group of the feelings is related to samisa vedana, the feeling which is connected to worldly feeling. And another group is the feelings related to niramisa vedana, the feeling which is connected to non-worldly feeling. That is, the feeling rises due to the contemplations on the Dhamma. So because of this, there will be 108 kinds of feeling. So various kinds of feeling are sometimes rising due to this phasa. So phasa, paccaya, vedana. And due to the vedana or the feeling, there arises upadana, tanha, or the craving. Also, there are 6 kinds of craving depending on the 6 sense bases. And sometimes also that craving can be divided into three kinds of craving. The craving for sensual places, or kama tanha, and the craving for the existence or becoming, the bhava tanha. It is also related to actually the six kinds of the tanha from these six sense bases, and also the feeling or the tanha, the craving related to vibhava tanha, the non-becoming. So this is connected actually to uttedavada, or something that's having a craving to disliking, not to having. So while the bhava tanha is the craving to get, the craving to gain, the craving to exist, but for vibhava tanha is the craving for disliking, for not having. So this is also a kind of craving. So the three kinds of craving are arising due to this vedana, or feeling. And because of the craving, or the craving as the condition, there arises upadana, attachments or clinging. So there are four kinds of attachment. Attachment to the sensual places that normally people are used to, sensual places, and also attachment to the view, the two padana, various kinds of view, either the good views or the bad view. Whatever it is, if it is attachment, it is also the defilements of mind. This is a factor how we get the suffering. So the view, and also the attachment to the silabata, or attachment to the ritual, rite and ritual. And the fourth one is the attachment to the notion or the doctrine of self. So something that we have the notion, we have the idea that there is self, there is atma, there is atta here. So attachment to this atta, attachment to the notion, the idea, the doctrines of self, it's also included to upadana. So vedana or tanha, paccaya, upadana. And because of upadana, or because of this attachment, there arises bhava, becoming. So there are three kinds of becoming. Becoming as in the kama, or in the sensual world, and becoming in the sense of the rupa bhava in the material world. And this is when the person's practicing the jhana, especially the material jhana, and there arises the rupa bhava. And becoming in the sense of arupa, that's been non-material world. So this is bhava. Bhava arises due to this upadana. And because of bhava, because of becoming, there arises jati, or this birth. We can be born in various kinds of realm, various kinds of world, in the 31 world according to Buddhism. And because of this birth, there will be various kinds of suffering. We have to experience the old, the decay, and then we have to experience the death. And within this life, because of the birth, we have to experience the sorrow, lamentation, the pain, the despair, and various kinds of feeling. And how this is the suffering, various kinds of suffering, the entire mass of suffering arises due to this avijja, sankara, vijnana, namarupa, salayatana, passa, vedana, tanha, upadana, bhava, jati. Because of these factors, we have to experience various kinds of suffering. And this is how, when we follow the steps, when we follow these factors, it is called as the miccha patipada, and the wrong path, incorrect path. Because by means of these factors, we will get various kinds of suffering. So therefore, the Buddha shows not only about these factors as the cause of suffering, as the cause of why we always get trapped in this rounds of birth and death, but also the Buddha shows about the reverse order of Dvadasanga Paticcasamuppada, the 12 factors of dependent origination. So here, what is the reverse order of this? We have to understand the first, avijjayatveva asesa viraga nirodha, sankara nirodho. With the complete cessation and fading away of these very avijja, there is the cessation of sankhara. So this statement of the Buddha shows us how in order to get rid of this suffering, we have to eliminate this avijja. In other words, we have to understand the Four Noble Truths, because the avijja, the non-understanding or ignorance here, refers to the non-understanding of the Four Noble Truths. So in order to be freed from this suffering, in order to eliminate the sankhara as the karma or the action, we have to understand avijja, and we have to eliminate avijja. So eliminating avijja means we have to understand the Four Noble Truths. We have to understand what is the truth of suffering. We have to understand what is the cause of suffering. We have to understand what is the cessation of suffering. And we have to understand the way leading to the cessation of suffering. This is the first thing that we have to know. So what is suffering? So as the Buddhist people, of course we understand, at least theoretically, that we understand that as long as we are living in this world, actually the whole world is suffering. From the very first, it's a very, very basic suffering that normally people understand until the subtlest kinds of suffering. So the very basic suffering is that about the suffering which is intrinsically suffering, that most of the people understand, like when we get the pain, or like when we get the separation from the one we love, and then we associate with conditions or the one we actually hate, and then we don't get what we want. That is the kind of suffering that most of the people understand. But this is the suffering which is intrinsically suffering. But more than that, we also have to understand that suffering is not only just about that, but the whole things which is subject to change, it is also to be considered as suffering. Even the pleasant feeling, the pleasant experience, as long as it is in the state of changing, it is also to be considered, to be understood as suffering. And not only just the pleasant feeling, that normal or usual pleasant feeling, as the worldly pleasant feeling, even the pleasant feeling arises due to the jhanic concentration, for example, that's also, the Buddha said, to be seen as the suffering, because there's jhanic concentration as the pleasant feeling itself is subject to change, impermanence. We cannot maintain as long as we want whatever pleasant feeling, including this jhanic concentration, to have. So therefore, this even very pleasant feeling, the sublime pleasant feeling, to be considered as the suffering, because that is subject to change. This is what the Buddha said as the viparinama dukkha, the suffering due to the changing. And ultimately, we have to understand that everything, without any, all the things, all the conditioned thing should be stated, should be seen as the suffering. This is sankhara dukkha. And sometimes I give one simile. Why this conditioned thing, whether pleasant or unpleasant or neutral things, to be considered as the suffering? Because all the things basically as a burden. For example, when you have the two bags, one is filled with the dirt or the rubbish, and another one is filled with the gems. Which one you choose? The first or the second? Or what's the second? But even the second one, when we try to taking up, it is a burden. Not only the first one, even the second one, when we take up, when we cling, when we attach, that is also the burden. So that is why all the conditioned thing basically is suffering, should be seen as suffering. And the first, we have to understand the suffering which is intrinsically suffering, and that is a very common suffering that most of the people understand. But we also have to understand all the things which is subject to change is suffering. Even the pleasant feeling, the pleasant experience is also suffering. And ultimately, we also understand that all the conditioned thing is a burden. Because of this is burden, this is also suffering. But the Buddha also shows us not only about the suffering, he also shows about the cause why we get suffered. Not only just the suffering, but the cause why we get suffering. And the cause of it is none other than the craving or the attachment and all the defilements of mind, the greed, the hatred, the delusion. All the defilements of mind are the cause of suffering. And because of these defilements of mind, rooted from the greed, hatred, delusion, and the proximate cause of this suffering, of the cause of suffering is the tanha, the craving. So this is how the suffering arises. And because of this is the cause of suffering, in order to get rid of this suffering, in order to eliminate this suffering, we have to eliminate the cause of suffering. We have to eliminate these defilements of mind. And this is our duty. This is our task as the Buddhist practitioners, that we live just for the sake of eliminating these cause of suffering. And by means of what? The Noble Eightfold Path as the way leading to the cessation of suffering. And this is our task that we have to do to develop this Noble Eightfold Path. So these four noble truths must be understood as the Buddhist person, as the Buddhist people, in order to eliminate the suffering and ultimately also eliminate the sankhara. And this is very important. And we have to understand that avidya pacaya sankhara, because of non-understanding of the Four Noble Truths, there arises various kinds of action, various kinds of karma. And now some people think that the Buddha shows about the karma in order to us to collect as much as possible the merits. Of course, to do meritorious deed is a good thing, but the Buddha doesn't stop there. The Buddha shows about the karma, also shows us that as long as we are in this round of karma, in this round of action, there will be the rebirth, there will be the suffering, there will be the samsaric life. So how this avidya, actually the cause that the people, the creatures, the beings doing various kinds of action, and sometimes good action, punya bisanggara, and sometimes bad action, apunya bisanggara, and even sometimes anenja bisanggara, the action which leads to arupa brahma, that is the arupa jhana. Practicing the jhana until attaining arupa jhana, the non-material jhana, and leading to the arupa brahma. Even though this is a very high world in the 31 world according to Buddhism, but this is still in the state of suffering, and that is due to this avidya pacaya sankhara. So the Buddha actually explaining about the karma is not only just to make us accumulate various kinds of merit, but also not only that, but the Buddha shows that as long as we are still in the round of karma, we are still in the rounds of rebirth, birth and death. So therefore, this karma itself should be destroyed. In order to destroy the suffering, the karma should be destroyed. That's why the Buddha mentioned tanha pahana kamang pahiyati. Kamang pahana dukhang pahiyati. With the destructions of tanha, the craving, this karma is also destroyed. And with the destructions of karma, this dukkha, suffering, is also destroyed. So the tanha, karma, and suffering, the three things which are interrelated. In order to destroy the suffering, the karma should be destroyed. In order to destroy the karma, the tanha, the craving, should be destroyed. So understanding the Four Noble Truths One of it is the cause of suffering, the tanha, as the cause of suffering that leads to the cessation of karma. And this is how, if you practice the vipassana, you practice especially the insight meditation, your mind is being trained not to have or not to do any actions. So in this practice of meditation, the insight meditation, you are trained to observe the object, to observe whatever arising phenomenon without any attachment, without any liking and disliking. Because liking and disliking are the two things which are actually arising due to the tanha, due to craving. When you are doing that, no any liking and disliking, there will be no any karma, there will be no any action. And all that can happen because understanding that tanha, the craving, is the cause of suffering. Understanding about the Four Noble Truths. So the mind is trained observing the object, observing the arisings of phenomenon without any attachment, without any liking and disliking, just observe. And that is how many meditation teachers mention or call it as the bare attention or passive awareness. In Indonesia we call it kesadaran pasif or bare attention, kesadaran murni, atau katakan perhatian yang murni. So we call it that. So this is because we understand that craving is the cause of suffering. So when we observe the object, we don't attach to the object without any liking and disliking. So this is how the karma is actually little by little is destroyed. In the Buddha's time, there is one story about one minister. The name of that minister is Santati. The Santati is actually going to the Buddha, visiting the Buddha, because he complaining about one event. That's one woman whom he likes very much died, and then he got very suffered, and then he told all the story, and the Buddha just giving one verse to him, and the stanza that given by the Buddha is like this: Yang pubetang visudehi pacate mahu kinjanang majeje no gahe sasi upasanto cari sasi. The meaning of this stanza is Yang pubetang visudehi, whatever the past, you have to cleanse. Cleanse the past. And for the future, pacate mahu kinjanang, don't add anything for the future. Or we can translate as empty the future. So cleanse the past, empty the future. Majeje no gahe sasi, if you don't hold anything in the present, if you don't attach anything in the presence, upasanto cari sasi, you will walk peacefully, your mind become peaceful. So this stanza, these statements of the Buddha is about the vipassana, about very connected, closely connected with this avijja pacaya sankhara. So why it is said as the whatever the past you cleanse or cleanse the past. So actually, according to Buddhism, whatever things that now we experience, whatever feeling that now we experience, it is due to the past condition. So we experience something that now we are experiencing something, whether pleasant feelings or unpleasant feeling or natural feeling or whatever it is due to the past condition. So when we just observe whatever things now occurring, which is now arising, just observe, that means we are now cleansing the past. And because of we are observing, without their liking and disliking, just observe with a bare attention, with a bare awareness, that means we are not doing any action which leads to the future fruits, future impact. So there is no any future. That means we try to empty the future, not add anything for the future. because we don't do any actions, just observe what is now present, without any liking and disliking, without any reacting, no adding anything, so the future will be emptied. And because of we observe whatever things that now arising without any attachment, so ma jeje no gahisasi, you don't hold anything what is present, not attached to anything what is present. And because of we are not holding anything what is present mindfully, we are much aware of what is present, very mindful about the present, but without any attachment, without any clinging, without any holding, so the mind becomes peaceful. Majeje no gahisasi, upasanto charisasi, you will walk peacefully. And this is actually how the avijja pacaya sankara, and we have to understand avijjaya trewa asesa viraga nirodha pacaya sankara nirodho. So with the cessation, the complete cessation, fading away of this avijja, including the tanha, the craving, as the cause of suffering, there also will be the cessation of sankara, various kinds of karma, various kinds of activities. And this is how we are practicing in the meditation, observing the object without any craving. So when we don't have any craving, there will be no action. So because we don't have any action, there will be no any future. And this is how we train our minds. And ultimately, perhaps one day, there will be the complete cessation of avijja, the complete cessation of karma, and that is Arahant. But now we are still training to do that. So this is the first thing. And sankara pacaya vijnana. So with the condition of sankara, various kinds of action, there will be the consciousness. So as long as there is the action, as long as there is this karma, there will be the continuation of this vijnana. So therefore, in this case, also we are being reminded not to entertaining in the sankara. In order to eliminate vijnana, in order to make this vijnana ceases, we also have to how to make this sankara also being eliminated. And this is how actually there is one statement given by the Buddha about one simile. If there is one seed, unbroken seed, that is a very good seed, and also there is the soil, the fertile soil, another one, there is the water. So this unbroken seed being put on the fertile soil and then poured with water, what happened? The seed will be growing. And because of that, it's a very fertile soil and water also enough, and then will be growing and growing. So this is how our mind. So when our consciousness is being watered by the sneha, so the seed is the consciousness, water is the sneha, that is synonymous to tanha, the craving, and the field, the soil, the fertile field, the fertile soil is the karma. So that means when our seed of the consciousness is being forced or being watered by this tanha, by the craving, and so that we always do various kinds of actions, this seed, this consciousness will be continuing from birth to another birth. Even though we have to understand this consciousness is not the same consciousness, because there is no any entity with regard to the consciousness, but this consciousness will be continued from birth to another birth because this karma and also this craving. Because of the tanha, because of the karma, so the consciousness will be growing, will be continuing from birth to another birth. But it does mean that this is the same consciousness, because if we regard that this is the same consciousness, this is the wrong view. This is not in accordance to the Buddha's teaching. So how we have to make this consciousness doesn't continue again? we have to eliminate this craving. We have to make understandings about the Four Noble Truths. And we have to train ourselves not to add anything for the future by eliminating the sankhara, the actions. And then this consciousness also to be eliminated. And the consciousness, with the consciousness as the condition, there arises name and form, or the four other aggregates. Because of these aggregates of the vijnana, aggregates of the consciousness, there arises the four other aggregates, the aggregates of the form, aggregates of the feeling, aggregates of the perception, and aggregates of the mental formation. So actually in Tipitaka or in Nidana Samyutta, the name and form, especially the name, is related to the Vedana, Sanya. There are 5 kinds of nama or the name. That is in this translation is the mental or the mind, yes, the mind or the name. So there are 5 kinds of things in the mind or in the name: Vedana, Sanya, Phassa, Cetana, and Manasikara. So Vedana is the feeling, Sanya is the perception, and then Cetana is the, how to say, in Indonesia we call kehendak atau niat. Intention, yeah, intention. Phassa is the contact, and then Manasikara is also intention, kind of intention, the mental focusing. That is a Manasikara. So the 3 things, Phassa, Cetana, and Manasikara, are the actually belonging to Sankhara. So therefore, in commentary literature, actually the whole Sankhara also belonging to this mind or the name or nama, the whole Sankhara. So these name and form or nama and rupa are the 4 aggregates, the aggregates of the form, the feeling, the perception, and the mental formation. And the vijnana is the vijnana, the aggregates of the vijnana, the consciousness. And because of this vijnana, there arises the 4 other aggregates, the name and form. And again, in some other discourses, similarly, with the arising of this name and form, there arises the consciousness. So these consciousness and name and form, nama and rupa, are the 2 things supporting to each other, just like the 2 bundles of bamboo leaning to each other, standing, leaning to each other. So when one is taken out, another one falls. And if another one is taken out, another one falls. So this is how the vijnana and namarupa supporting to each other. Because of the vijnana, they are arising nama and rupa. And because of nama and rupa, they are arising the vijnana. And vijnana has the habit of this kind of, it is a kind that vijnana is the subject and the nama rupa is the object. So the vijnana has the habit to always catch the object, to find its footing, that is a nama rupa. While the nama rupa can exist, can continue to exist because of being grasped by this vijnana. And vijnana can exist, can continue because of having the object, that nama rupa. So the nama rupa is catching the vijnana is catching the nama rupa, and the nama rupa can exist because of being caught by this vijnana. And how this vijnana and nama rupa supporting to each other. And the Buddha says that actually we are wandering in the cycles of birth and death is due to these 2 things. Because of this vijnana and namarupa. Because of this vijnana and namarupa supporting to each other from the very long time ago, and we cannot see the beginnings of this vijnana namarupa until now, they are supporting to each other, and then we continue in this cycles of birth and death. So therefore, with this statement, our duty is how to break up this vijnana and namarupa. How to make this vijnana doesn't have any its footing, doesn't have any objects, and how these objects or nama rupa doesn't or are not caught by this vijnana. And this is how the insight meditation needs to be practiced. Because in this insight meditations, the mind is trained to see everything as anicca, dukkha, anatta. To see everything as impermanence, subject to change, related to suffering, and these everything, the five aggregates, the vijnana and namarupa, are devoid of self, anatta. So seeing these five aggregates as anicca, impermanence, as suffering, dukkha, as devoid of self, makes the mind withdrawing, makes the mind not attaching. So this is how to see this anicca, dukkha, and anatta in order to make our minds not attach, not cling to this object, to this name and form. So the mind, the consciousness is trained not to attach name and form, nama and rupa. And of course, when the mind is not attaching to the name and form, and the name and form is not being attached, and suppose that name and form disappears, so the consciousness also disappears. Because this consciousness could arise, could exist due to the name and form. And the name and form can continue due to this consciousness. But the training that we have to do in this meditation is how to see everything as anicca, dukkha, and anatta. In order to that, our mind doesn't attach to anything. Because there is no any sense why we have to attach something which is impermanence. Because when we attach to something which is impermanence, there will be the suffering. Because whatever impermanence, if we attach, if we cling, and sooner or later that will be changing or disappear, and the rising, the suffering will be rising. And also because of these impermanent things is devoid of self, so what is the use of being attaching to something which is devoid of self? So the mind to see this anicca, dukkha, and anatta in order to make our mind doesn't attach, doesn't cling to anything. So this is how the consciousness being trained not to hold any kinds of the object, especially the name and form. So this is our duty, our task as the Buddhist person practicing the meditation, especially the vipassana, not to attach to anything, to train our mind not to cling, to attach to anything, to any object, especially the name and form. So I think if I continue until finish, because the time also almost 11 o'clock, and I think according to the schedule until 10:30, right? Yeah. 11. But is there any question and answer? Yeah. So I think these even three things, if we practice properly, understanding with the cessations of avijja, there will be the cessation of sankhara by means of how we practicing vipassana inside meditation, not to cling to anything, to observe whatever thing rising without any attachment, not to add anything for the future, not to give any action for the future which is leading for the future, and also to how to eliminate this craving, this action, so that this consciousness will not continue, and how to understand anicca, dukkha, and anatta, to train ourselves, to train our minds, not to attach to anything, to the object, to the name and form. If we train in such a way, that itself will bring benefits to us and will lead to the happiness and ultimately the freedom, the liberations. Thank you very much.